Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Bath and North East Somerset Planning Committee. It's Wednesday, the 3rd of July 2024. My name's Councillor Ian Halsall. I'm chair of the committee. I do feel rather too important sitting up here, but we don't normally use this room for committee, but it does feel a little bit too formal, perhaps. Could I remind everybody to switch off their phones and other electronic devices? Just to double check that, please. Thank you. I'll introduce my colleagues here on the top table.
Good morning, I'm Karina Haskins from Democratic Services.
Good morning, I'm Christopher Griggs-Trevarthen. I'm a team manager in the Development Management team.
Hello, I'm Simon Elias in the Council's legal team.
Thank you. We have our planning officers here as well on the left. Angus and Ed. We are in, first of all, I'll say the meeting is being recorded and filmed. For benefit of any public speakers, if you don't want to be filmed, if you can please just have a word with the camera operators in the corner. They'll make sure that you're not on screen. This is going out on our council's website, and also it will be on YouTube as well. Just for the benefit of members, as we all know, there's an election tomorrow, so it is important that we don't make any overtly political statements or raise any matters that are of a politically sensitive nature, so if we could please refrain from doing so on this occasion. Thank you. I'll ask Karina to read out the emergency evacuation procedure.
Thank you, Chair. If the continuous alarm sounds, you must evacuate the building and proceed to the assembly point. From this room, you follow the illuminated green signs to the exit using either the marble staircase at the end of the building nearest to Bath Abbey or the main staircase. Please do not use the lifts. The assembly point for this building is in Orange Grove on the green outside Browns. Thank you.
Thank you. Karina, could I ask, are there any apologies for absence or substitutions?
Yes, apologies from Councillor Toby Simon and apologies from Councillor Deborah Collins and Councillor Ruth Malloy is substituting.
Thank you, and get well soon, Councillor Simon. Can I ask Planning Committee members, have you got any interest to declare in respect to the agenda? No, thank you. I've got no urgent business to raise with you, so I will ask Karina to advise on how we take public statements and the process and how long that will take.
Thank you. So speakers will be called to speak immediately after the case officer has made their presentation about the application. The order of the speakers and the time allowed for speaking will be as follows. If there's any parish or town council representatives, they would speak first and will be allowed 3 minutes. Objectors to an application will be allowed 3 minutes in total. Supporters of an application will be allowed 3 minutes in total. And if there's more than one objector or supporter, they must share the 3 minutes allowed to each side. Ward councillors not on the committee who have indicated they wish to speak may do so for a maximum of 5 minutes. And speeches will be timed by the traffic light system you can see on the table next to me. At the start, the light will be green and will turn to amber when there is 1 minute of speaking time remaining. When the light turns red, speakers should immediately conclude their remarks. And just to say, because we've got this microphone system in the council chamber, the 2 tables there are set up for public speakers. So when you speak, you just press the button and the light will come on.
Thank you very much. Right, we last met on the 5th of June. Minutes have been published. Could I ask a member to put forward the motion to support the minutes? Thank you, Councillor Jackson, and seconded by Councillor Crossley. Right, we had a site visit late last month from an application at Staddlestones in Salford that was deferred. That was a very useful visit. So if I could ask Ed to present the case once again.
Yeah, morning everybody. We came to committee last month, but we deferred for a site visit, which, like Ian says, we did a week or so ago, so I hope that was helpful for members. But just to remind you, this application for a 2-storey side extension and a rear balcony and some kind of other alterations to the house. So this is the application site outlined in red, and you can see the property itself within that red line. We are in the conservation area, and as you know, as we talked about, there is a listed building south of the site, and we're located at the end of Salford Court. So these plans give a bird's eye kind of view, kind of good concept of what's going on. So it's the existing proposed site plans. I don't think if I move my cursor it will show on the screen, but hopefully you can see the two-storey side extension there with the rear balcony and how it extends into the garden land to the side. This is essentially the same, but just kind of a closer look. So you can see the glazed link there, and then the rest of the two-storey side extension. So these are the existing elevations of the house, from the front, rear, and the sides. And we'll now move to the proposed. We may need to switch between the two later on in the debate, but hopefully this gives a good idea. And again, the existing floor plans. And the proposed floor plans. So this may be helpful later on in the discussion, but I thought I'd add it in as one of my slides anyway for now. As you know, the Greenbelt calculations and increases are sort of the main sort of consideration here. So in red, that's the original dwelling. In that sort of dark orange brown colour, that is the previous two-storey addition that received planning permission. And then you can see the side extension here, both the dark green and the light green. The difference in that is that the section in the lighter green is that which is located in the green belt. But yeah, we may need to circle back to that one later. And that green dashed line is the green belt boundary. So yeah, obviously these site photos are helpful. I think the site visit probably was even more helpful to sort of get an idea of how it is on the ground. But here are some of the site photos here, looking at the existing house on the top left from the garden area. And then the photograph on the top right is more looking away and showing that the enclosed nature of the site. So for the reasons in my report, the officer recommendation is to permit the application.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Okay, so the recommendation is to permit. We do have a number of speakers. We have two objectors, one supporter, and also Councillor Duncan Hensel, who's a ward member for Salford, is also going to speak. Could I invite Carol Chung and Helen Mulholland, if you'd like to come to the middle table? I'm presuming, obviously, you were here last month, weren't you, as well? So you'll be sharing the 3 minutes between you. Yeah.
Good morning. The proposals are a disproportionate addition to the original building and would not preserve or enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area or the setting of listed Salford House as legally required. The side extension would be almost entirely outside the existing plot and situated in the green belt. There do not appear to be any exceptional circumstances for permitting this. Moreover, Bain's own guidance on the conservation area states new development should respect existing plot boundaries. The huge entrance, roof extensions and use of glass would alter the visual and spatial aspects of the conservation area. The glass link is unlikely to reduce the visual size of the side extension as claimed. The building would be significantly larger than the other court dwellings. These were designed to complement each other and be appropriate for the conservation area. It would greatly impinge on the important open aspects of the landscape to the north, from our house, other court properties and from Salford House. Bain's own guidance states that these views from within the conservation area need to be protected. Number 5 is visible from a number of rights of way. The proposals would harm the views of Saltford's historic core from these paths. It is unclear how a condition to prevent the extension becoming a separate dwelling could be permanently enforced. To permit this raises issues of inconsistency and would also set a dangerous precedent for future development in the conservation area and the green belt. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you, committee members. The proposed extension would contravene the Greenbelt policy and the GDPO in terms of the 66% increase in volume and the 75% increase in width over the original building. There are no exceptional circumstances, nor does it meet any exemptions. The quoted Sevenoaks case was for a car shelter extension to a garage that was already in the Greenbelt, as was the main dwelling. The garage also had a different use, and there was no encroachment and no new buildings in that case, so very different to this application. More appeals have used the Gravesham test, which this application would not pass. Bain's own policy for dwellings and outbuildings accords with this test. The land on which most of the extension is to be built has been designated for garden use only. Conditions were set that no building be erected on that land to maintain the openness of the green belt. Introducing an expanse of glazing and an exceptionally large frontage would make number 5 completely out of character with the other dwellings in Saltford Court and the conservation area, causing harm to the character and setting. The extension and new frontage would be clearly visible from 4 of the other 5 properties, 2 of them being that was once the old coach house attached to Saltford House. The entire extension and most of the new frontage would be clearly visible from the north end of my property. To allow this application would set a precedent and to introduce inconsistency, and I ask that it be refused.
Thank you very much, both of you, for your comments. Okay, could I ask Chris Dance to come forward? Thank you. You're speaking in support of application. You're the agent for the applicants.
Thank you, Chair and members. I speak in support of this proposal. You have before you a comprehensive report which fully evaluates all the key planning issues in a positive light, concluding that planning permission should be granted. And I'd just like to highlight the salient points from that report which are material to the grant of planning permission. Firstly, in terms of Greenbelt policy. The report fully examines in a detailed manner the implication of this, particularly in light of the individual circumstances where the main dwelling is not within the Greenbelt, but the location of the extension is within the Greenbelt. The officer correctly reports that in assessing whether the proposal constitutes a disproportionate addition, you have to evaluate both the visual and spatial analysis implications of the scheme. The conclusion is the extension will not appear disproportionate, given the site context and the fact that the extent of works in the Greenbelt is small in percentage terms. I fully endorse the advice and recommendations in that analysis. With regard to the land where the extension is proposed, the officer's report clearly identifies this is existing residential garden land. Turning to the design aspects of the scheme, the report again identifies how the proposal will respond positively to the character and appearance of the original dwelling and preserve both the setting of this part of the conservation area and also in particular Saltford House, both of which are heritage assets. The scheme has been carefully designed from a residential amenity perspective, and given its location and relationship to neighbouring properties, there will be no harmful residential amenity impacts in terms of overbearing, loss of privacy or overshadowing. In terms of ecology, the scheme has been sensitive to its location and interface with the Greenbelt and openness, and it will have a light-sensitive approach to its design. Members, those are the key material considerations with respect to this proposal. The comprehensive report analyses all of those, recommends that planning permission should be granted, and I will end by recommending that you follow the officer's advice and grant planning permission. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much. I'll now ask Councillor Hounsell to make his representations. You were unable to attend the last meeting, but a statement was read out on your behalf, but obviously you're here now and you can speak from the comfort of your own chair there. So you've got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Thank you to the committee for undertaking a site visit and your time today. I know the committee will probe and scrutinise this application with its usual rigour to check whether this application is policy compliant. I am focusing on a few main points. It's perfectly reasonable for a house owner to seek to extend and enhance a home. This application in many other locations would be acceptable. A more modest application in this location could also be acceptable. However, there is a fundamental planning issue that means this application should be refused. The existing house is not in Greenbelt, but the extension in part would be, and that fact triggers the volume calculation of a 66% increase when in excess of the 1/3 guideline. If this application was granted, it would imply that any property close to the Greenbelt boundary could be extended into Greenbelt by a 1/3 or more volume increase on the size of the original property. Greenbelt boundaries must only be changed by the council in a local plan, not changed piecemeal by the desires of house owners. Although a very different application, many members here will recall the April meeting and the refusal of an application at 9 Van Diemen's Lane. The committee objected to a raised lawn of which only one triangular corner was in Greenbelt. This application at 5 Saltford Court is not simply a raised lawn, but for a substantial increase of built form in Greenbelt. The officer in his report states, consideration has also been given to the fact that the extent of built works in the Greenbelt is actually rather small in percentage terms. That was a question was asked on the site visit. What is the proportion of the actual extension in Greenbelt? Now, a neighbour has calculated it to be closer to close to 2/3 of it, and we saw the visual display this morning, which I expect you will return to. It certainly doesn't look rather small. There are no exceptional circumstances. There is no public benefit. The fact that the owners of 5 Saltford Court also own the adjacent green space, which is in the curtilage of Selwood Farm, is irrelevant to determining this application. Planning is about property, not ownership, and it may be that one or both of the two properties could have new owners in the future. Although you were not able to experience this on your site visit, the application, if allowed, seems likely to have felt Selwood Farm is privacy and outlook, contrary to policy D6. There are other matters that should be considered. If allowed, would this be, as the officer claims, seen as part of an existing cluster of large buildings? Or, on your site visit, did you experience Saltford Court as a quiet cul-de-sac with modest house sizes, with number 5 Saltford Court almost mirroring number 6 at the top end of the private road? Did you experience Saltford Court as having been sensitively developed in the setting of a Grade 2 listed building and garden? If that's how you experience Saltford Court, then the proposal does not fit with the street scene because it would be disproportionately a larger property and not contribute positively to local distinctiveness and site context, contrary to policies D1B and D2A. Development in Greenbelt is by definition harmful. There are no visual and spatial aspects in this location that reduce that harm except for one hedge. One purpose of Greenbelt is to safeguard the countryside from encroachment. I ask you to refuse this application mainly because it represents a significant encroachment of building form on the Greenbelt on the edge of a conservation area with no exceptional circumstances demonstrated, an opinion shared by the Parish Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hansel. We'll move on now to the members, and I'll ask, have you got any questions that you want to ask of Ed? Councillor Jackson.
Thanks. Sorry about that. It's really quite difficult for me both to see and to see the screen. And I couldn't pick up from what the officer's presentation was how we did the site visit, and that was extremely helpful because it showed us so much more than the officer could show on the slides. Now, what I wondered if the officer could answer or indicate is what kind of mitigation would be put in place for the fact that there was an extremely fine herbaceous border which is going to be massacred if this extension goes ahead. And secondly, That's the first question, is what is the mitigation for the destruction of that part of the garden? Secondly, Councillor Hansel and the residents have mentioned the impact on the public rights of way. I'm afraid I didn't pick that one up, but I was wondering if an appropriate condition would be the preservation of the hedge the other side and the greenery that might shield this extension from public view a bit more. And finally, we've had a comment about materials. Is the officer satisfied that there isn't an overuse of glass? Thank you.
Thank you. Ed, Chris, would you answer this one?
Yeah, so in terms, I mean, yeah, obviously there will be some loss of garden as a result of development, and that's sort of expected. For householder development, it's not typical that you seek that much sort of mitigation for that sort of loss, but there is mitigation provided anyway. In the bottom left of the garden, there's a mitigation native hedgerow going in, and I think there are a small number of trees being planted as well as part of the scheme. So I think there's a silver birch, hawthorn, and something else which I can't read without zooming in, it would be blurred. But yeah, there's essentially some 3 trees and a replacement hedge going in, which really sort of probably goes above and beyond what you would normally expect with a householder extension application. Yeah, materials we are okay with. I mean, apart from the glazed link, they'll be the same. I think we obviously have picked up on the fact that that glazed link does sort of introduce a more modern design aspect, and obviously, yeah, there aren't other large glazed links in the court, but that's all sort of been taken into a balance, and for the reasons we've set out, we believe that that's achievable and that it overall respects the character and appearance of the area, although a new sort of aspect that would be seen, it's considered. That doesn't mean it's necessarily unacceptable. And then about the condition on the public right of way, not sure.
Could you indicate where the public rights of way are and whether there would be any planting to shield this house from the view of people on?
I don't have that plan, but we don't think the scheme needs shielding particularly, because we've considered it to comply with our design policies, so we don't feel there's a need to hide it.
Just to jump in there, just to say, yeah, I agree with what Ed's saying, is that officers don't feel the need for a condition to seek the retention of the existing hedgerows that aren't affected by the development. If members were so inclined and were concerned about that, then a landscaping type condition could be applied to any permission issued to sort of secure the delivery of that mitigation planting and possibly the retention of other parts of the landscaping in the scheme. But you'd have to give a justification for that.
Would you be kind enough to put the elevations on the screen for everyone's benefit? Councillor Gawley, do you have a question?
It was partly a comment that one of the speakers made about conditions on the garden not to be built on, was my understanding. And I'm wondering how that squares with the officer's recommendation to permit, if that indeed is the case. So that's one question. The other question is, if you look at just the plot, the existing plot of the house, it does seem to me that it is overdeveloped on that plot. If you take aside the garden section, which I understand is owned by the same family, but isn't part of the entire plot of the house.
Yeah, so I think it was maybe like 2005 time, or around then, that there was that permission for the residential garden, and there were some conditions on that. But they weren't, they essentially removal of permitted development rights. So what that means is it's not that you can never build anything on that land. It's if you want to build anything, you need to come in with a planning application. So, you know, some people have, you can do some things without planning permission. We took those rights away. So all it means is that if you want to have something there, you have to put a planning application in, and then that's what's happened. And what was?
It was a question about overdevelopment on the plot itself, and the implications then. If the garden section is owned by the same family but is not part of the plot of the house, is that not just overdevelopment of the plot in which the house sits?
So no, we don't think there's overdevelopment. The applicant owns that land as well. But yeah, we don't see that as overdevelopment of the plot.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hodge.
I'd just like to ask a further question on the point that Councillor Gawley made. So I was just looking at a bit more at the detail of the 2005 permission and the conditions that Councillor Gawley raised. The emphasis of the permission was, and I quote, the policy in respect to the green belt does not preclude the change of use to the garden, and with the imposition of conditions to restrict the construction of buildings or structures, the use of the area of land as proposed should not detract from the openness of the green belt. However, the permissions, I think, go a little bit further in their emphasis than has just been described, and it states that other freestanding buildings should not be erected without prior permission, and the reason is the introduction of further curtilage buildings requires detailed consideration by the local planning authority to safeguard the appearance of the development and the amenities of the surrounding area. So I just wondered how you came to the conclusion that this building didn't have any impact on the green belt in that location.
Yeah, well, that's all set out in the officer report. So it comes down to design, size, scale, siting. The site visit was also helpful for demonstrating the enclosed nature of the site. For example, it's not like in the middle of the countryside sort of site. So, yeah, we have considered those things, and that's all laid out. And the reasons why we feel it's acceptable is all set out.
Can I just pick up on one other point that was raised by one of the speakers? Respect within our existing plot boundaries and the respect for that within our planning policy. That one of the speakers mentioned that. Can you elaborate on that a bit in terms of policy, or is that not really a significant one?
I don't know what I can say. I mean, we look at plot boundaries on applications and things, but it's just sort of another one of those kind of considerations. I don't know what I can really say on that.
Councillor Hughes, you've got a question.
Just some clarification actually on the NPPF. So the first one is whether this is a garden or a field, does the NPPF apply any different weights regardless of whether it's considered to be a garden or agricultural land or field?
So the NPPF says that you can extend buildings within the green belt. I don't think it goes on to dissect fields and gardens and things like that. It doesn't go into that.
Okay, so there's no different weights applied to this, the fact that it's a garden rather than an open field?
No, I don't think so, Chris.
There's nothing in the NPPF that suggests you have to do that, but there is also nothing stopping you from applying. As with any consideration, you've got to look at the context of the application. Policy won't always specify what to do in each context. That's the judgment for the decision makers to make.
Okay. And again, with the NPPF, it doesn't apply any tolerance to to the boundary. So regardless whether the encroachment encroaches by a yard or a mile, we don't apply any tolerance. The line is a fixed line. Is that correct?
Well, essentially, it's... Do you mean like the greenbelt boundary?
Yeah.
So I don't understand the question. Sorry, do you mind?
Well, we have a line that says this is a green belt line.
Yeah.
There is no tolerance to that line, so you can't.
Sorry.
That's the line, and you could encroach it by a yard either side or half a mile either side. It's a fixed line with no tolerance. Is that correct? Within the MPF rules.
Oh yeah, the greenbelt boundary line isn't changing at all, and I think that's something that was said in one of the representations. The greenbelt line isn't changing. The greenbelt line boundary is all staying the same. Hang on, let me. So yeah, that's the greenbelt line hashed. That's going to stay as greenbelt. It's just that the building is going into the greenbelt.
Okay, any more questions? Councillor McPhee.
Just to pick up Councillor Hansell's point is if we are in Greenbelt, then we would need extenuating circumstances. I don't think.
So because it's a form of appropriate development, so the MPPF says you can extend buildings in the Greenbelt, so it's an appropriate form in principle. So that means it's not inappropriate development, so you don't have to, it's not triggered for exceptional circumstances because it's an appropriate form of development as outlined in the MPPF. So we're not triggered to do that test.
Councillor Jackson, did you have another question?
Yes, I have a problem. I mean, I am a bit spatially challenged, but if you go back to that rather good, useful diagram showing what in red and in green, the proportions there, that's the one. I mean, that's very, very useful, especially as you see the line going through. The bit that's in the green belt does seem to be very large. It must be nearly half the size of the building that's not in the green belt. And I am struggling with this whole question of proportionality and whether it is not a rather dominating feature on the main house, which I know is not in the green belt, and whether we should be applying the rule of approximately a third, which it looks to me as though it's rather larger than a third of the mother building.
Okay, was that a question or just a comment you would make?
The officer might have some useful comments on that reflection.
We've sent out the percentages. The extent of development in the actual green belt is around 33%. But when you consider the historic application outside of the green belt and the other alterations they're making to the house outside of the green belt, we've added that all together as well as that dark green bit. So we've added everything together, and that is the 66% figure. But yeah, we've done the volumes, and so has the agent. We checked them and we agree with them that the extent of development in the actual green belt is around 33%.
Okay, Councillor Hodge, you have another question?
So I'm confused about which Greenbelt policy applies here, because when we're talking about extensions of buildings within the Greenbelt, the original building that we're extending it's related to existing buildings in the Greenbelt being extended. But we're now applying this to a building that isn't in the Greenbelt, and so surely it's a different policy. You know, can we apply both to the same rules? And it seems to me that has more in parallel with the Van Diemen's application, which I'm looking at here in front of me, which is a new bit of building in the Greenbelt that doesn't really have material considerations weighing in its favour in any special circumstances. I think we need guidance on the policy.
I'll just jump in on that one if that's okay. The MPPF, as we've heard, it does allow certain types of new development in the Greenbelt, and it says the general point, as you know, it's a restrictive policy, so it says new building is generally not acceptable and is considered inappropriate development unless it meets one of the exceptions. One of those exceptions being an extension of existing property. The new building, in planning terms, an extension is a new building because it's a new building operation. And so that bit is in the Greenbelt. And so the starting point is it's inappropriate development unless it meets that one of those exceptions. And then is it a disproportionate addition to the original building? The original building being outside of the Greenbelt has no impact on whether that test is triggered, but it does, in officers' view, have an impact on the assessment of whether or not it's disproportionate. So hence why we have, in this case, deviated from the usual 1/3 rule, which we would apply to buildings that are wholly within the Greenbelt, and why we in this specific circumstances of this case, feel that the overall volume increase to the building, which is 66%, is acceptable. Hopefully that's clear. So the test for members is really, is this a disproportionate addition to the original dwelling, given these circumstances in this context?
Okay, Councillor Jackson.
I'm wondering if we're actually looking at this the wrong way down the telescope. If we were to lay on one side this whole contentious issue of Greenbelt, would the officer not consider that this is a disproportionately large extension impacting on the character of a building in a conservation area, and the design is also not sympathetic to the host building? So just forget the Greenbelt and look at the block as it is, and would you not think that might be an argument we ought to resolve?
So we do consider the design okay. So yeah, we have obviously considered Greenbelt impacts, and then we've also separately considered character, appearance and conservation area impacts, and that's all set out and assessed. So yeah, we've demonstrated why we think it's okay in Greenbelt and non-Greenbelt.
Councillor Malloy, you've got a question.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just wondering, all these calculations on percentages and so on, based on the size of the original house, which is the red, isn't it? Why is the extension in brown not included in those? I'm just, we've included that as a previous addition, so that kind of rolls over into the volume increase. So when we say it's 66%, that's including that orange-brown extension as well. Yeah, okay, because I'm looking at the document about the volume calculations, and it's not clear from that. And when you say from the original house, it's saying the garage and the shed are included in the calculations, but it wasn't clear to me that the previous extension was included. Anyway, perhaps it's not so relevant to the discussion. I just was interested.
I think, sorry, just to clarify, I think what you mean is the garage and the shed are included in the volume of the original house, so that's what your baseline volume, but the brown, orange two-storey rear extension that's previously permitted, that's an addition, so that's sort of on the other side of the scales, adding towards that percentage increase.
Have we got any more questions? Okay, we'll move on to consider the application and debate it. The House obviously has been extended in the past, and this is a further extension that's been proposed. So obviously we've got to consider whether the extension is in proportion, whether it is at an acceptable scale. Obviously there's the issue about the Greenbelt, which has been raised. Also we need to consider the impact of the proposal on the setting of the conservation area. So who wants to start the debate? Have we got anybody who wants to? Councillor Hughes, normally you like to put your name forward first.
Whether you want to or not.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so my concern with this is We have a green belt, we have a boundary, and it's there for a reason. Now, we may not agree with the reason it's there, but if we don't agree with the reason it's there, then the process is that we go through the local plan, we adjust the boundary, and then we can change permissions in terms of building. But at the moment, this is green belts. And looking at the MPPF, I can't see anywhere in the MPPF that would permit this. It doesn't provide any community benefits. There are no exceptional circumstances. So I am concerned about this encroachment. And as I tried to discuss earlier, whether you're encroaching into the green belt by a matter of 10 yards or whether it's half a mile, it's still an encroachment, and the boundary's there for a reason, to give us some protection. So I do have concerns about that, and I would prefer these applications to go through the correct process of adjustment of the local plan before we start building on them. As for the design, I don't have a huge issue. I think that perhaps the glass area is perhaps not in keeping with the street scene, so perhaps that's not quite appropriate. But my main concern, as I say, is this encroachment.
Anybody else want to speak? Councillor Jackson.
I'm inclined to broadly agree with that. I don't think the extension is an appropriate design which will conserve and enhance the conservation area, and I think it will have a negative impact on the surrounding buildings, whether they can be seen or not seen.
Councillor Crossley.
Thank you very much. I think, myself, I come to a completely different conclusion from the case officer in this one. I think the extension is completely disproportionate to the current building. It's out of character with the neighbourhood, and as far as I'm concerned, it should be refused. So at an appropriate point, I'm quite happy to move a refusal with some reasons.
So you want to put forward a motion to refuse it? And
I want to do that now, yes. I'd like to propose that we overturn the officer recommendation.
Right. And that is on the basis of the scale of the development? Scale
of development, the disproportionality, the impact on the green belt.
Thank you very much. Does anybody wish to second that? Councillor Jackson, you seconded. So does anybody else want to say anything before we take a vote? Councillor Hodge.
I'm in agreement with the reasons set out previously.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, Chris will just clarify the recommended grounds for refusal.
Okay, I think that was fairly clear from you, Councillor Crossley, but just to double check and make sure we're all aligned with the policy tests. Your motion is that you consider the extension to be a disproportionate addition in the green belt, and from what I've heard from the debate as well, you consider there not to be any very special circumstances to justify it in that instance. And also you mentioned it being out of character with the conservation area. So those are the two substantive reasons I've recorded. So that's correct. Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, of course, that could always be subject to a challenge at appeal. Right, we'll take a vote then. So the recommendation, or the motion that's been put forward is to go against the officer's recommendation. All those in favour? So that looks like it's 9 in favour, there's none against and no abstentions. So the application has been refused. Thank you. Are we okay to carry on, or do you want to have a short break? Yeah, we'll carry on. Yeah, we'll wind things up. We've got a busy couple of days ahead, haven't we? Right, the next application is Willow Barn in Bishop Sutton. This is a variation of condition, and Angus will explain what the proposal is for.
Thank you, Chair. Just wait a moment and for the presentation to come back up on screen. Yes, so this application is for variation of conditions to an application approved in 2020 for the erection of a new garage and carport. They're seeking to vary conditions 2, which was the plans list condition, and conditions 5, which was a compliance condition that sought to retain the garage as a garage for parking of motor vehicles. The application is seeking to use the garage as a home office now, and the plans list is being modified as they are infilling the front elevation of the carport to include a new wall and some glazed doors for the Home Office use. The site location plan is up on screen, so I appreciate that the red line boundary of the garage itself is quite small. The aerial imagery shows the garage a bit more clearly as the white square, the white rectangle in the southwest corner, which is currently under construction following its approved planning application. The approved elevations are up on screen here, showing an open double carport within the frame of the building itself, with one enclosed garage, which can be seen with that timber cladding on the front elevation. The elevations have timber cladding with slate tiles to the roof, with an overhang at the front. As approved, the floor plans here show the two carport spaces with a single garage space, a side door to provide access into the garage itself. The proposed elevations up on screen. Apologies for the colour scheme. The colours do not match as they are proposed, and a photograph will show more accurately the colour of the timber which has been chosen. But the frame of the building has remained very much the same. The elevations are timber clad, and the main difference to note is the two glazed bifold door units providing access into the Home Office. The single garage door will remain, and the single side doorway to provide access into the side of the building will remain as well. The floor plan shows the Home Office space where the two carport spaces were previously. The blue dots indicate the down-pointing LED lights to provide light on the inside, with the bifold doors there on the left side of the drawing, with the enclosed garage space on the south side here. There is a toilet facilities inside, but as we discussed previously, it doesn't have shower facilities or any other living facilities inside. Some photographs of the site show the building under construction. So the materials of the building itself can't yet be seen as it's not quite there yet. The top right photograph shows the front of the building, and some of the landscaping can be seen in a snapshot to the side and to the rear. And the host dwelling can be seen in this part of the frame, which shows the natural stained timber, cedar cladding that is proposed for the building itself. For the reasons recommended, this variation is to be permitted.
Thank you. We have nobody, members of the public, wanted to speak on this application, but I've got it down here that Councillor Dave Harding would have been here had you not been on a holiday, but he has provided a statement which Karina will read out.
Thank you, Chair. So, as a statement from a ward councillor, Councillor Dave Harding. Stowe Sutton Parish Council have objected to the current application. In particular, I note that the proposed development is within the AONB. The area is known to be inhabited and foraged by bats, and government policy is that by encouraging good design, planning policies and decisions should limit the impact of light pollution from artificial light on local amenity, intrinsically dark landscapes and nature conservation. Previous statements on an adjacent application have highlighted the impact that further building in this area could potentially have for harm to owls and bats due to disturbance to commuting routes to foraging habitat and from additional lighting. And he refers to an appeal with a reference. The appeal decision refusal 19-04452/FUL of an earlier application in this location cited insufficient information submitted in relation to disturbance to commuting routes and foraging habitats, although this was subsequently clarified in later documentation. This current application involves the addition of a large amount of glass to the front of the building, which may interfere with echolocation and increase the risk of collision and injury or death to bats. Without up-to-date ecological assessment of the local commuting and foraging bats in this new environment, the application cannot be said to demonstrate compliance with the Neighbourhood Plan Policy SSHP06, nor NPPF 2023 paragraph 191C. In addition, the Parish Council have asked me to request to the committee that they review whether this new application should be viewed as a separate site from the main accommodation, therefore a split site. The Parish Council requests that the permitted development rights be removed if the site is deemed a split site. Thank you.
Thank you, Karina. So based on Councillor Harding's statement there, the issue that's been raised is relating to the concern about bats. Is this type of application, does it justify a bat survey?
It's the officer opinion that this does not. As the parish comments have correctly raised, there has been a history with submission of protected species information for development on this site previously. The triple garage, which can be seen in the aerial photograph, which belongs to the neighbouring property, that was subject to the appeal that was just referenced. At the time, insufficient information was submitted regarding protected species for the new building itself, for the construction of the whole building, and the building included some roof lights and some side windows, which warranted the checking of said information. Similarly, when the 2020 application was received for this site, similar checks were undertaken with protected species surveys, which was subsequently found to be acceptable, with no concerns raised, subject to conditions that any further external lighting added to the exterior of the building should not come forward without further planning applications. So now with the updated change to the building that has already been approved and is already under construction, the implementation of the doors is not considered to warrant any further protected species surveys to be undertaken. I can provide a bit more clarity on that if needed, but that's a summary answer.
Yeah, thank you. That was really clear and well informed. The building is inward facing. I mean, it's obviously under construction at the moment, so it has got permission. So all we are looking at and considering is the installation of glazing, really, in the elevation. Does anybody want to raise any questions with the officer, Councillor Gourley?
If it is such a concern about lighting, can't there be a condition for blinds and curtains?
Mitigation hasn't been put forward in this case, so we can't condition compliance with those details as they've not been found necessary to be put forward or asked for as part of the application. I would check in with Chris quickly, just as a procedural question, is this something appropriate to add in at this point?
So we have in other cases used conditions around automated blinds and things, usually for skylights rather than for bifold doors, as I'm not sure how that practically works. But as Angus has set out in officer's judgment in this case, it's not necessary, and one of the tests of planning conditions is that they have to be necessary to make the development acceptable.
Thank you. Anybody else got a question for Councillor Hodge?
Yes, I just wondered the history of this condition 5, with the approval of the application for the garages. Why was it felt important to put the condition on that it should only be used as a garage for private motor vehicles and for no other purpose before we...
Back in 2020, at the time of the decision, we hadn't had the local plan partial update adopted, which seeks a maximum of parking spaces. So at the time of the decision-making for the 2020 scheme, we still thought that all development should provide a minimum number of parking spaces. So where parking spaces were proposed to make a development to be necessary for a new development, we would condition their retention. So I would imagine that was the motivation behind the original condition. But given the change in our policy, it's just not considered to be necessary anymore.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Jackson.
Well, I'm just a bit curious about whether there have been any proper observations of bat movements in this area. What is known about the bat population. But my other question is, bats don't do what planners want them to do. They moved out of the Victoria Hall in Radstock when it was renovated and moved into the public toilets, which had 24/7 lighting. So I'm a bit hesitant to say that we can't allow this variation because we haven't got a back report, and I wondered what the officer's thinking was and whether some simple back roof structure would answer all the problems anyhow.
I can't claim to be an expert on the motivation of back movements. The surveys undertaken on the previous application, so the 2020 application for this case, as well as the neighbouring application following their appeal, did have the protected species surveys undertaken, which found that there were limited movements of different species around the local area. But a more detailed answer to your question would need more surveys to be undertaken to find out exactly what is where at this present time, because species do move around between surveys even. So I couldn't provide you a very detailed answer for this application.
Councillor Crossley.
Yeah, I'm always a little bit concerned about planning creep. So we're turning a garage into an office. How do you ensure going forward that that doesn't become living accommodation?
Yes, so this was a concern I think raised by the parish council comments as well, of how, should this site be separated? How do we ensure that it remains as proposed? We are due to determine the application as it is proposed. It's proposed to be a garage rather than living accommodation at the moment. The change to an independent living unit would need separate planning permission. That is a change of use, and it would require a new planning application. That would be assessed on its own merits at the time. I couldn't say at this point whether that would or wouldn't be found acceptable. But as it stands, the application isn't being proposed for that. If we were particularly interested about the use of the building going forward, we could condition that it remains ancillary to the main property, but planning only has limited power, and if they did want to sort of wiggle some of their rooms around internally only, that is their right to do so.
Where is their current office accommodation?
I'm not sure. This application hasn't been put forward with floor plans for the house itself. It's just for the garage. So I wouldn't be able to comment on the internal layout of the house itself at this point.
So just to yes.
So if you're turning it from a garage into an office, so an office...
Could you use your microphone for the purpose of the camera, please? Thank you.
Sorry. So an office does require all those extra facilities to be put in that are needed for living, such as toiletry and water. Is that going in as part of this, or is it just purely going to be an office without it? So you've got it in there, so you're actually turning this into...
That's right, the toilet's being put in.
Potentially a mini house.
Not a new house, as the rest of the facilities aren't being proposed. There's no kitchen, there's no shower, there's no utility units being put in, or that being proposed at this time.
Modern kitchen only needs a microwave.
Well,
a lot of young people only live by microwaves.
That may be so, but that's just not what's being proposed at this time. Yeah. But there is a toilet being put in, which it seems perfectly reasonable to have a toilet in your home office.
So to summarise, this is office use only. If at any stage they wanted to use it for something else, they'd have to come back with a full planning application.
It can be ancillary to the main house, so they could use it for an office, or they may take the desks out and use it as a home gym or something like that, as long as it's still bound to the house itself in an ancillary use. If it was to be separated into an independent living unit, that would require planning permission again, and which would be given a full assessment at the time.
So just to be clear, it would be reasonable for the committee to ask to impose a condition to prevent what is an ancillary building becoming a granny annex, for example. So we could put a condition on and they would have to apply for permission even if the building was to stay within the same curtilage.
Yes, the condition I don't believe it can be that exact. It would just be limiting the building to being an ancillary use to the main house. A granny annex may still pass that test of being ancillary to the main house, as long as it's not filtered off into the elderly relative having everything for day-to-day living and living a completely separate life in a completely separate living unit. So, yeah, the condition can be imposed as such, but it only has limited powers as long as it's still ancillary to the main house.
Councillor Jackson, you have a quick other question.
Well, there is another way of looking at this, but it hasn't been put forward as part of the application argument, as far as I know. The owner of the house, and who is the same person as the owner of this property, obviously, might be commuting somewhere to an office in Bishop Sutton or somewhere else, and that having the office next to his house would be good for the climate because he wouldn't be commuting anywhere. But we don't know that. That hasn't been put forward, but it is quite an important consideration that if people can work from home or near home, that they're saving the planet, really. I don't see that we have any proper reason in planning policy to refuse this application, and therefore I'm proposing we accept the officer's recommendation.
Okay, we moved into territory of debate there. So before we actually carry on, is there any more questions for the officer? Councillor Malloy and then Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, sorry if I missed it somewhere in the notes, but so the assumption is that this will be used as an office space by the person who owns the main house, and that's acceptable. But is there anything that stipulates it can't be sublet to another, for commercial purposes, to somebody else running their business? Is there anything, or does that come with
that would be a change of use again, so that would require a change of use from ancillary accommodation to whatever the business use might be at that point, whatever is proposed. But yes, it's being put forward as just a home office for the house itself, rather than commercial office or anything like that. It's not a change of use application in this case. So
we shouldn't even be thinking or considering that at all at this point. It will be a separate application.
That would be a separate application, yes, to consider those details at the time.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, and apologies if you've answered this. The acoustics aren't brilliant in this room, so if I've missed it, I apologise. But going back to the bats, so there hasn't been a new survey done since this application. They're still relying on the previous survey where this was purely a garage with no external lighting.
The previous garage did have some external lighting. Sorry, I was speaking to my friend better. The external garage had some downlights proposed on the outside of the carport doors. I'll just flick up to the old plans for that. So it's quite hard to see, but kind of under the overhang, there were some downlights proposed, which are marked with a cross on the floor plan here, which were assessed at the time with the ecologist input at the time, and no concern was found at the time of that application. But you're correct, no new surveys have been done now for this new scheme.
So we haven't assessed the impact of these huge glass doors on that. There has been a survey since they proposed that.
The survey hasn't been undertaken, but my assessment of the case has given consideration to those points, and it's considered that, well, I've considered that in this case, there is no significant increase in light spill or resulting harm, based on a couple of factors, which I'll just outline. I'll flick back up to the site plan for it. The doors will face out to the east, which are facing in towards the site itself rather than out towards the wider landscape. The building is quite small proportionately. They are only a couple of glazed units which are limited to the ground floor underneath the overhangs and inset slightly from the eaves. There are no other windows also proposed on this building. There's no side, rear or roof lights proposed, which will further help minimise light spilling out in different directions. And given the home office use, it's not primary living space for the house itself, so there will be limited hours of use rather than it being their main living room which they will use into the evening. So with these factors combined, our consideration was that it doesn't result in significant harm or light spill.
So in your assessment, you're saying that part of your assessment is the fact that it won't be used as any sort of primary use, but we've established that they can use this for quite a lot of uses, including they could use it as an overnight accommodation, not just daytime accommodation.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, that's not as it's being proposed now, but you are correct. It could be, so that can be taken into account as part of your decision-making if you wanted to, if you felt it necessary. Given the detached nature of the building, I don't deem it likely to become a primary living space, such as a living room, to be used well into the evening. But you're right; it could become bedroom space. At which point they would surely be using curtains for their doors when it does get dark, just for their own privacy.
Sure. So I mean, it wouldn't rule out things like Airbnb and stuff like that. So it could have an evening and nighttime use that we couldn't prevent.
Yes, I might defer up to Chris for further comments on the Airbnb usage, as I'm a little fuzzy on how the use class of that falls. But again, as we were saying earlier, if it does become a completely independent living unit, that's where a new planning application would be necessary, so we could then scrutinise this all over again.
Just to add on the Airbnb point, the point at which a property becomes represents a change. The point at which use of a property for Airbnb represents a change of use is a matter of fact and degree, so it would be in each case. I think, for all of the points Angus has made about the use of the building, there's also, we have to look at the application in front of us. We can sort of theoretically think about what the possible worst use could happen, but we also have to take into account what's likely to happen as well. So.
Yeah, there's a lot of speculation going on about what if and what could happen. It is an ancillary building to a host dwelling. We have that canopy going over the front, which will conceal some of the glazing anyway, and any light spill, as you suggested, Angus, if it was used for any overnight accommodation. First of all, there are no shower facilities internally anyway. It's not to say that they can't put them in at a later stage, yeah, I mean, clearly, if it was going to become a separate dwelling or a separate commercial use, then planning permission would be required. So we just need to look at this application on the merits of the glazing in terms of the design and the amenity as part of an ancillary use. Councillor Hodge, have you got a question, or do you want to move on to a debate? We're still questions at the moment, yes.
The question, whether the planning history of this site, which seems relevant to the conversation, is relevant as a material consideration. The series of the conversion of the agricultural barn to possible holiday accommodation, the quashing of that at the High Court, and then the final conversion of the barn to residential dwelling. All that history seems material to considering what what conditions might need to be on the garage and for future use. Is that history a material consideration for the development of this site, which was originally an agricultural building to the farm adjacent?
Yeah, you can certainly use those considerations if we were looking to justify having a condition to limit it to ancillary use. I would be cautious looking too far back in the history to base more what-if questions for things that may need planning permission on its own, for changing to independent living units itself, just because, again, those proposals would require their own planning permissions again. But, certainly if you were thinking about the ancillary use condition, taking into account the site's planning history, seems perfectly reasonable to me.
Any more questions, or shall we just move on to the debate and discuss the merits? Councillor.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to move on to the debate. I think as a planning committee, we have to look at what is in front of us rather than what may be this time next year or the year after that. And I have no issues with this. I think we've probably covered most of it in the questions, so I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation to permit.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson?
I'm happy to second.
That's very kind, thank you. Is there a general appetite to have an additional condition if we were to approve the application? to make it ancillary, to ensure, to spell it out that it's an ancillary development, yes. I've nodded to both Councillor Warren
I don't
and
actually
Councillor
think
Jackson.
it's necessary, Chair.
You don't? It's okay.
I think what we have in front of us, I think if they are going to do what they're not going to do, they're going to do it anyway. If I'm honest, what they're not meant to do, and it's probably another strip down the line. I'm not sure what it adds to it.
Okay, you put forward a motion to go with the officer's recommendation without an ancillary condition. Councillor Jackson, you're content with that?
Well, it may seem to be superfluous, but I would say, you know, it's shutting the stable door before the horse bolts, and especially as enforcement is not terribly easy for us in a location like this. So I would be happy to have the condition about ancillary use put in.
Thank you. Councillor Hodge, did you have any additional points? Okay. Councillor Warren.
Yeah, I'm happy to go with...
We'll have the condition on
Correct,
if we support it. Councillor Crossley, did you have any comments to make?
This is a minor change.
Yeah.
Something we've already committed, and I think we should be...
Let's move to the vote then. Okay, so Councillor Warren proposed the motion to support the officer's recommendation and has agreed that we'll have an additional condition to ensure that it's ancillary. That's been seconded by Councillor Jackson. All those in favour? Anyone against? No, and no abstentions. So that's a unanimous approval. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next item, which is the appeals report. Does anybody have any observations or comments? I do notice that Rockcliffe Road, which we refused as a committee a few months ago, has been submitted as an appeal. Councillor Jackson?
Yes, I'm very concerned about the fact that, most unusually for us, we have two appeals here on the grounds that the time frame has run out, for non-determination, in other words. And I wondered if we could have an explanation of how that had come about and whether any measures were needed to prevent us getting a slew of these. There's one in my ward which has not been resolved, as far as I can tell, and must have run out of time. So do we have a general problem here of which these two appeals are indicative?
Chris, I think you have a theory on why we've got non-determination appeals.
Yeah, so we have noticed that we've, in the last sort of 6 months or so, we've had about 3, and we usually get maybe 1 a year or less, so that is slightly unusual. It's probably too early to say whether that is a blip and just a coincidence or not, but it's something we do want to keep an eye on. The cases on the appeals report, there are specific circumstances around each of those where officers were still engaging with the applicants, and for whatever reason the applicants just decided to go ahead and appeal. Yes, one of the theories that I'm possibly mooting, although obviously I need to investigate further, was that there is actually generally a greater awareness amongst applicants of the non-determination appeal process because of some issues around the performance of neighbouring authorities where they've not been able to get decisions. They've got backlogs of applications, and so agents have been advising applicants to go to non-determination appeal to ensure they get a decision at all. That's not the experience here. We do validate applications quickly, and we do try and work through them. There are delays and workflow issues with resources, etc. But our officers are very good at communicating with applicants and agreeing extensions of time. And one of the things I will be doing is reminding the team to continue that communication with applicants and agree extensions of time before the target date is passed, so that there is then no opportunity to appeal against non-determination. But I will look into the matter further for you, Councillor Jackson.
Councillor Jackson.
I've been mandated by Westfield Parish Council to ask what the position is with regard to the enforcement team, because I believe one member has gone on sabbatical or something. We seem to have quite a few historic cases that they're concerned about, and so I wondered what the general position was.
Yes, good time to actually provide a bit of an update. So Pippa Brown went on a sabbatical at the start of the year. She will be back next year, but as of last Monday, we've got a temporary replacement in post, and Nadine, and she will be picking up some of that workload. But yes, the enforcement team is essentially at full strength at the moment. We've got no vacancies there.
Thank you. We'll take note of the appeals report in that case. If there's nothing further, we'll... Oh, Councillor Hodge, you have a comment?
Is there any other business?
We can move on to any other business if we're happy. Yeah.
I just wondered, in light of the recent paddle court application and the possibility that more will come forward, that I could request on behalf of the committee that some site visits to maybe more than one paddle court, particularly one in a residential area, is arranged for the committee before other applications come forward to help with our determination.
Okay, we can discuss that with the officers, to investigate whether there is, in reasonable distance, where there is an existing paddleboard facility, and see if we can arrange a site visit. I'll leave that with the officers to try and organise. Thank you. We did have a site visit at the end of June. As well as going to Salford, we were supposed to do a pre-site visit at the proposed supermarket on the London Road. Unfortunately, the applicant didn't unlock the gate, so we were unable to see that. It's anticipated at this current time that the application is going to come to the 31st of July committee, and I think it would be in everyone's best interest if we did still do a site visit. So we do have in the diary the 22nd of July, the Monday, to do that. Is that correct? Yeah.
That's correct, although we haven't actually fixed a date. I think that there's a possibility we might move it to the 23rd, and I don't know whether there's any thought, that's the Tuesday, any thoughts on that. So we're just trying to accommodate as many members as possible. So we'll send out something about that shortly.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll have confirmation of that. Right, we'll formally close the meeting. To quote one politician, go back to your constituencies and prepare for government. Thank you very much.